All righty, it's 6:09. I'd like to call the special board meeting to order. May I have roll call, please?
Anderson.
Here.
Miller.
Present.
Levy.
Here.
Delgado.
Present.
Larson.
Here.
Wong.
Here.
Jacobs.
Here.
All members present. Jacobs is on the telephone.
May I have approval of the agenda, please?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for approval of the agenda. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right. The agenda is approved, which brings us to item 2A, the WASB initial planning meeting for the superintendent search. We have Dan Urad, who is our consultant from WASB, here to help facilitate the meeting.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope all of you are doing well. And I do appreciate this opportunity to gather to look at the entire search. I don't want anyone to feel overwhelmed by the agenda. There are parts of the agenda, in the main, the first parts of the agenda that are the most important to cover. And there are pieces, if we don't get to them, that we can certainly cover along the way at different meetings, at benchmark kind of meetings, using that term. For when we meet for other purposes, we could deal with items as well. Let me just double check. Are you okay to hear me? You hearing me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. All right. Please let me know if there's any problem with that. One of the things that was important from my perspective is to be able to get a sense of what is your vision for this search. And so I know it's about a search. I know it's about finding your next superintendent. And I know that we're going to work together in a way that will accomplish that aim. But I think it's important that we kind of break that apart a little bit. And so let me explain why I think it's important that we have some discussion about this, prior to getting into some of the mechanics around calendar and timeline and the use of focus groups. As I tried to explain in the times we've had together, foundational to WSB search is the process of engagement. And mainly that happens with the search that we do with you through the use of focus groups and the use of a community survey. And in addition to the hopeful good news that can come through an engagement process, that is a healthy thing for any organization to be involved with, the key functional thing that gets created from those engagements is a development of a profile for your next superintendent of schools. And what's not lost on me is the fact that you've gone through this process and you've engaged in the work to identify a profile. And so what's unknown to me is how much you're feeling that it's important that this engagement work be done around the search. And first and foremost, I want you to know that we recommend that it be done. The survey can be done concurrently with the focus groups because it involves a different methodology. But a key point, I guess, for you to consider around what your vision for this search is, how does doing that work fit with the kind of timeline that you have in your minds to be able to accomplish this work? That was the reason why I decided to present to you two different timelines. And by the way, we'll get into those in more detail, but at the end of the day, we may settle on a very different timeline. And so I'll frame up when we get to that, how in fact they're different and why I framed it that way with two different timelines. But it's important, I think, for us to have some discussion and for me to get some direction from you about the engagement work, in particular as it sits with your timeline. And if the engagement does occur, is there a way that we can work to identify a way that it can meet both your timeline needs as well as the engagement need, the work to do the engagement? So is there a way to balance that in a way that can fit with, what's inside of you guys around your timeline? And so that's why I wanted to be able to start this tonight with some discussion with you around what kind of vision do you hold for the search, in particular around the use of the engagement practices, and how do you see those fitting with, the kind of timeline that you have in mind to be able to complete a search? And all of that said with the understanding that I know you have an interim in place for this current school year, and I don't know what your options would be given the timeline that would be established. And so it would really help to listen to you in terms of, those concepts around the vision for the search. What do you want to accomplish around the engagement work, and how do you see that fitting with your timeline?
All right, so I think since we have so many new board members, I think I would like to call on each board member, give them a chance to share their thoughts, if that's okay with everybody. Stephanie, do you want to go first so I don't forget about you?
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay.
And just an FYI call, you're going in and out a little bit. So Dan, when you say engagement, so do you want me just to give my opinion on how I personally see the process going?
Yeah, yes, I would. And ultimately, that's what I'm looking for. But in particular, as it relates to, yes, we propose engagement. And yes, I know you've done some engagement in your other searches. So, if you could weave that part into how you see it going, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so I was not part, and I think only 2 of the board members currently were through the previous search. So I have not. I'm a retired principal. I have done a lot of hiring. I would like to be in on the ground level personally. I would like to look through the applicants. I'd like to be, and this is just my wants, I would like to be as active as possible. I don't mind pouring through documents. I like doing that. I like seeing everything. I don't, and of course I am part of the board. So of course I'll be part of that team. And I'm just, of course, saying personally what I would like to do, but I feel very strongly about being involved at every facet since I am familiar with hiring. No, I've not hired a superintendent, but again, that being said, I've hired. So I'm very familiar with the hiring process, what needs to be done, what needs to be looked at. I'm much more comfortable if as a board, and my colleagues feel the same way, that we are just very hands-on and very much a part of the process from start to finish. Is that what you're looking for, Dan?
Yeah, I think that, yes, that is what I'm looking for. But how comfortable are you? If timeline wasn't a consideration, would you be in favor of using the community survey and doing the focus groups?
Yes, I definitely am.
Okay.
I think we need to really involve the community as much as possible.
Okay, anything else, Stephanie?
If something else pops up, can I tell you later?
Yep, let's give everyone else a turn first. Maria?
Absolutely, thank you.
Your thoughts about community engagement?
I think for me that's very, very important. I think the community needs to be engaged in the search of this new superintendent. I like the idea of the surveys and focus groups. I think that's going to be great. But I think most important is to really incorporate and have staff and administration be involved in that too, because the superintendent is going to be dealing with them directly. So it's.
Excuse me, you're breaking up a little bit.
Okay, maybe can I speak a little bit, I don't know, slower or?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
That sounds fine now. That sounds fine.
Okay. So I was saying that it's very important to have staff and teachers be part of this as well and be engaged in the search of this new superintendent. So I do like the idea of surveys and focus groups.
Okay. Thank you.
John, thoughts?
Being one of the two that went through it before, I'm definitely in favor of the engagement of the community and the staff. My hope is that we get enough people to come out and actually do that, or how we're going to do that. That's going to be the challenge right now, and I know that you're going to address that. And you've talked about that, doing some virtual surveys with that, which we'll leave that up to you. I'm curious to know the questions, how they're going to be addressed. If it's going to be an open forum to let people just kind of talk and tell us what they would like to see in the next superintendent. It's the survey as well. I think that goes out to the community as a whole for that maybe are not part of the forums that you would have or the meetings. I think those would be very good to get, especially to staff and to the current administration as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my take on it.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
I would echo what has been said with Stephanie. I completely agree. I would like for us as a board to be very hands-on and seeing preliminary documents, applications, et cetera. It's critically important that our community, our staff, and our families, but I would also like to see other community stakeholders involved to a certain extent in the search of the next superintendent. And then I would really be interested in pursuing a parallel search. I definitely don't want to pressure Sue. I would love for you to stay for the upcoming school year. I think that we are experiencing so much change and a global pandemic, et cetera. I think it would be really important to have the stability of an interim superintendent that is currently working well. So I would like to look at an option where we have a parallel search. If Sue is not interested in committing to an entire school year, because I do not want to rush this process. I don't want us to feel like, well, we came this far, we have to pick someone. If it's not the right fit, I want us to have a viable option to step back, but not miss the continuity of having an established professional in place.
Understood. Thank you very much.
Spencer, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I definitely want to see the community input. Our community has certain needs that need to be met, and the only way we can find out is by getting those answers from the people. So we got to find that one person that's right for our community, which is going to be the hardest task for us. And like Amy said, let's not rush it. We got to take our time, and as long as we have the time for it, let's take it and really review everything correctly.
Megan?
Thank you.
Hi, I would like to echo as well. I'm in favor of doing a parallel search. I am eager to stabilize our district, and that's either going to come from finding somebody really awesome to fill that role, and if we can't find that really awesome person right away, I just don't want us to be in a corner where we're just settling. So I'm in favor of that. I think everybody's obviously come out strongly in favor of community engagement. I would agree with that. I think specifically the way I'd like to see that work, if we could consider this, our board needs to focus very strongly on our relationships and trust. And I think that with all of the uncertainty and instability of COVID, people are already stressed out and not in the best frame of mind. And I think that if we ask them solely to participate in a virtual platform, it's going to be a turnoff for a lot of our parents who are frustrated with educational technology that they've had to deal with for the first time, et cetera. So I'm wondering if we could explore having something where we can keep you up on the screen here at least at each of our elementary schools, and maybe like by appointment, let people show up in person so we could safely invite people to contribute if there's any possible legal way to do that. Because I think some people are going to be really turned off by only doing a survey or participating in a virtual forum.
Can you repeat that last part? Because that was, for me at least, it was breaking up quite a bit in terms of where you were talking about a way to do the focus groups, not virtually, or...
Case in point, here I am with a mask talking into a microphone to you on the television screen. So my apologies. I'll try to be more clear.
Okay.
I was wondering if it would be possible to host like in-person input, like feedback sessions even if it's just for parents and staff, although I think it should be open to everybody, but we should certainly market it to parents and teachers and administrators. I wonder if people could sign up for time slots if and only if there is a safe way to do this. If this is going to be like a cluster, then we don't need to go there. But I just think that everybody's struggling a lot right now with their 21st century technology skills, and I don't want the perception to be that the board hasn't done everything possible to reach into the community and make sure that we're accessible. There are some people, parents specifically, with valuable input who might not feel that they have the technological access or resources to be able to have their voice heard. So I just want us to be really open-minded and outside of the box in how we consider gathering that input.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So it sounds like, yes, we are very dedicated to collecting data again to create a profile and not necessarily using anything that we had collected already.
Was there a formal profile developed in your last search, profile for the next superintendent, that I could at least access to be able to, what that was?
We do, and we have a flyer that Ray and Associates had created for us also. So do you want me just to kind of read it, or?
No, I don't need you to read it.
Okay.
If Michelle could, that would be great.
Okay, all right. Yeah, we do have it.
Okay, that would be very helpful. So, at the risk of being obvious, but I just don't want to assume things. It sounds to me that you want to move forward and ensure a way to have engagement with stakeholders. I mean, everyone spoke to that. That's pretty obvious. And we will have to sort through what will be the method for that. And we can talk more about that as we work through the rest of the agenda. I can tell you just as a precursor to that discussion that almost all of those things in the state right now are happening virtually. And that goes to that issue of, I think it was Megan at the end said, we have to make sure that this, we find a safe way to do it too, because you don't want to do something in goodwill and then be perceived as not creating a safe way to do it. But those are bridges that we can cross over as we continue to do the work. I want to mention to you in terms of that input about being involved, and just to make sure that you understand the way WSB does searches, and it may represent a difference with the other firm. It does, because each of them have their own way, is that you will see every application and all the materials the day after the posting through WSB closes. And what you're sent to a link. You're provided a link, and each of you will have all of those materials. We do not do pre-screen of those applicants. There's a process that we would meet. All the applications we're in. I would provide you a rubric to review those applications with. Doesn't mean that you have to only use that rubric, but at least a tool that you can use to sort through And I would take you through a facilitated process to be able to identify who you want to interview off that entire pool. And so we don't come in with a list. At the same time, have information about candidates that really that's important for me to share with you based on our knowledge about those candidates. I will do that. So, so please understand that while you'll see it all, and these are your decisions to make, and I'll provide you a process to work through who you want to select for interviews, but I'll also provide you information that I have for you to be able to consider in your decision making.
John?
So I think, yeah.
Dan, I just want to make a comment to the rest of the board as well, and you probably are fully aware of this, and I know Sue and I have had conversations about it. The average tenure in the state of Wisconsin for a superintendent is what, 2 years? Between 2 and 3 years. And so that if that tells you anything about, obviously, the part of the problem, but the biggest problem with the superintendents coming in is generally the 7 people at the table here. And that's what I experienced, I guess, in the last couple of years, and I know Kyle can probably attest to this as well, that regardless of what we do with the search and the person that we bring in, that person has to come in and be willing to work with this group here. And that is of utmost importance, because if there's conflicts and there's problems, as we've witnessed and experienced, 4 of us have, it's not going to work. And it doesn't matter. We can bring in the best person in the country and it won't work. So I think that we need to be aware of that. And I was going to throw out one other thing is that we'll probably get to it and you'll probably discuss it, but the onboarding process to me, I think, is essential. And that's something that I think we failed in the last go around. So I think that, those are 2 things that I want to make a comment about. The process that we went through before, I don't think was really much different. We saw all the applications. The timeline that we're looking at right now, I think, is a little challenged compared to when we did it before. But it's great to see it's great to see that we have 13 potential candidates as well. So, but I wanted 16. Wow, that's already going up to 3. So, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade here, but I just want everybody to understand that it's the 7 of us here that probably are going to make or break this whole overall situation. So, and so far, obviously it's been one night, and but I'm feeling very confident. So.
Well, and if I might respond to that, I very much agree with that. And my urging for you is, to have your discussions and to share your points of view, but understand that these candidates, especially those that have a number of choices as to where they could serve, meaning that they're high quality candidates, are going to be interviewing you as much as you're going to be interviewing them. I mean, it doesn't come in the same form, but they're going to be wanting to learn about the community. They will learn about the community. They will learn about your school district, and they will know about the journey that you've been on. And so part of this is, and I'm very encouraged by, your interest in engagement, because underneath that is an interest around trust building. And so one of the things I would strongly encourage you is to look at this process as a trust building process as well, and understand there's plenty of room for differences of opinion. But at the end of the day, your best candidate or your best candidates will be engaging with you to learn about how well they feel they can work with you. And so, it doesn't mean that you have to put on a shiny new outfit. I believe in people being who they are, but you also don't want to be about creating unusual difficulties throughout this process, because those will be clearly picked up by those candidates. I mean, and there's just so much information out there now. What you've experienced, I will say to you, can be overcome. I mean, I truly believe that, and you're not alone with the kinds of things that you've experienced. But the question is, can you go to a place now that will give you the best shot at finding the best superintendent candidate in the end? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And Amy has a question also.
What strategies do you use, if any, to ensure that there's diversity in the candidate pool? Do you just put out the announcement and whoever comes, comes? Is there intentional and active work being done on the back end to ensure that we will at least have a diverse pool of applicants? How does that work?
That must be the goal that we have. I mean, and so I want you to know that I'm very much in concert with that aspiration. I mean, I truly am. And so one of the things that the advantage of the School Board Association search process is that we are a member of a national organization called the National Association of Superintendent Searchers. And what that mainly, what it is I think there are like, don't hold me to this number, but 40 some of the 50 states school board associations do superintendent searches. And they have joined together to help share candidates. And so one of the things that we have an advantage of is reaching beyond the typical, we will do the typical posting through WASB for this position, but we also will want to engage with, we will engage with that national association. The other thing that at some point in time you'll need to consider is what we put in our proposal, but we didn't build it into our costing, is there is additional national advertising that could be done in a more targeted way through some of the major national organizations that are working with superintendents in particular. And so, yes, we will do our typical outreach. Yes, we will do the National Association of Superintendent Searchers. You also have an ability to decide if you want to do national advertising. And one of the other things that, while our work is solely to find superintendents to place in Wisconsin, we don't place superintendents even across your border into Illinois. But we know the candidates that are out there in the state of Wisconsin. So there are 7 or 8 of us that are doing this work for the School Board Association, and we share candidates across all of us. So we're going to give it our best shot working with you based on what you want to do to ensure a diverse candidate pool. The other thing I do want to mention, and you create an opportunity to mention it now, and we can talk about that at another time in more detail about how we can go about that. And in the main, you go about that through the interview process, and you go about that through the references that you would do. And there are other ideas too. But we need to ensure a diverse pool of candidates. Moreover, and this is a both and, we need to ensure culturally competent candidates. And so how does a school board working with an organization like ours work to ensure no matter who you select in the end, that they're a culturally competent person, a leader? So keep that thought. We can talk another time about that. Yes, it's about a diverse pool, and yes, it's about a culturally competent set of candidates.
Dan, I do have a question, because it looks like on both of the timelines, the postings would be made May 6th, and we as a board don't have another meeting planned before that. If the board was interested in posting and advertising within the national associations for diverse administrators, could that cost come out of the $12,000 that we have in the contract not to exceed? And then as we approached that $12,000, we could add more if we need to. So right now, if the board said, yes, we want to advertise and post with these agencies, can we do that?
I'll work with you in any way you want to work to accomplish that.
Okay. So I would ask the board now, would you like to, I can't remember the name. I know there's one for African Americans and Latinos right off the top of my head. So are those two national organizations that the board right now definitely wants to?
Can I get a list of the options and kind of like a blurb? So
Sure.
we know what we're agreeing to?
Sure. Did you hear, Amy asked if it was possible to get like a list of possible organizations.
Okay.
and a little description for each one.
Okay. Sure.
Thank you.
I'm just making a note of that. Yes, I can certainly do that. And in going back to your original question, know that we don't put it into the base costing for the proposal because some boards want to do it and some boards don't want to do it. But I'll work with you in any way. Don't be at this point hung up about that not to exceed amount.
Okay, thank you.
So are you okay with moving forward through the agenda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go to the calendars that I sent to you? Do you have those available?
Michelle gave them to us in a folder yesterday, so you should have two of them. It looks, two different ones. Does everybody have those? Okay.
Just to clarify, are we working on a parallel search model? Is this just looking for a superintendent and not also an interim? I just want to be clear on the process.
Well, I think what I would need to know, once you settle on the timeline, I think it is important that you have a discussion with Sue. Because I know that there's an interest in trying to move this forward in a thorough way, but also in a time-sensitive way as well. And so we can do a parallel search if that's what you would desire. But I don't know if you're at that point where you want to do that, or I should say if you need to do that, or if you want to do that. Those are decisions that you're going to have to make once you confirm what the timeline is going to look like. Then that can have some bearing on whether or not there is a need to look at an interim.
Okay, so it sounds to me like you would like us to agree on a timeline and then have the discussion about a parallel search once we've agreed
Right.
upon a timeline. And then,
Right.
and we would have to negotiate another contract for a parallel search because the one we have currently is only for the superintendent search, correct?
Well, that is correct, but here's my thought process on that. And I helped another district in Wisconsin find an interim. Their superintendent left with 1 week notice at the start of this school year. And so they were very much in a very time sensitive. And just to show you how it worked out, their interim that's been in place for this entire year has decided to stay 2 more years. And she was a recently retired superintendent. So you never know where how things can work out. But in terms of WSB search on the not to exceed amount, yes, that's a cap unless we agree together that something should be done with that. But we only bill for the hours that we put in. So if there's an interim search, I don't think you would necessarily have to do a different contract. I mean, if you were more comfortable with an interim search contract, I would be happy to work with you to get that done. But I don't know that should be a necessity, because let's just say an interim, if we took a month to find an interim, I'm just making up a time now, that interim search would conclude our work. And then if you were still wanting to work with me on the long-term search, we can decide when we would start that.
Okay, so is it okay if we work on that timeline and then we can talk about a concurrent search? Okay.
And so we'll go to timeline in just a second, but it gives me a chance, in light of some of the discussion around the parallel search, to tell you that even though that you may face some time constraints with looking for a superintendent, you never want to settle. And so, and that'll be part of the support that I'll provide you to make sure that you're comfortable if a full search went forward, you're comfortable in confirming your finalist. And if you're not comfortable, then how do we approach the placement of an interim for that period of time? And so you won't get any pressure from me to say, well, you've got to, we went through this search and you've got to pick somebody now, because you don't want to do that to yourselves. And I would never be a proponent of that. So if we could go to the timelines, that would be great. So what I prepared for you were 2 timelines, and how they differ is in the shorter timeline, meaning the search would be done sooner timeline, there is no engagement. And now I know what your perspective, that was the value of that early discussion. So understanding that that is something that you desire, I would ask that we focus on the 1 timeline, because what I basically did is I was able to move up the timeline about a month, from like 4 months to 3 months, by not having that engagement piece in there. And so understanding what you said, I think the focus should really be on the calendar that doesn't have any crossouts, because that calendar that had some crossouts is really to remove the engagement piece. I was trying to find a way, if you said we have our profile, we don't see a need for engagement, I was trying to present to you a calendar that would work with that. Are you following me?
Yep, we follow.
Okay, so then let's focus on the calendar with that doesn't.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. This is Stephanie. I'm not following because I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Which are we looking now at hiring somebody as late as August 29th?
Well, here's what I'm going to say to you is keep in mind what I tried to communicate at the beginning here. These are timelines that more or less fit the typical timeline for a WSB full search.
Mm-hmm.
I believe even doing the engagement, we can make some accommodations here. But yeah, the answer to that question is with what you have, that is correct. But so
okay.
The question then becomes, where can we make some adjustments? And I'm open to working with you to make adjustments. So let me give you one example. In our proposal to you, we built in focus groups, and we built in a number of 12 focus groups. If we do fewer focus groups, and I can tell you that districts vary greatly about the number that they do. Some do 2 or 3. In my last 2 searches, they were 8 and 9, the number of focus groups. And I can work with you on doing those over a couple-day period of time. And so that may be a place where we could adjust this calendar to move it up or for example. But in the proposal, we actually built in 12 focus groups. And so, again, this calendar really reflects a more traditional way that WSB goes through their search process with school board. We can work to make some adjustments.
Okay, Amy has a question.
Could you provide some context for how a district arrives at the number of focus groups they're doing? What was different in the districts that had 2 or 3 focus groups versus the ones that had 8 or 9?
It's all local. I don't know how to say it any other way. I don't find too many boards of education that don't want to do these engagements, but they just differ in terms of how many they feel they want to be able to do. And in that 8 and 9, one was a very small district, and one was kind of a medium to not medium to large, medium to smaller district, and they felt that they wanted to really spend time in that process, and they didn't want to leave groups feeling out of it. So I hope that's responsive to your question, but everything's local. It's really, my thought for you would be at a minimum, on, and I know there's a whole agenda item on focus group, but we're there now. You want to be able to have a focus group that is not focus groups staff oriented. And in the most recent searches that I've done, they've been by level, an elementary, a middle, a high school, one preschool focus group of staff. We are proponents of those focus groups with staff as the professional staff, and then we're also a proponent for support staff at the school level doing separate focus groups. Because what we have seen is the professional staff tend to have many more ideas, and they tend to kind of blunt the input, I don't know how to say it any other way, of the support staff. So you could think of it as, you could do with staff, you could do by school, you could do by level, but I would ask that you think about maybe some separate one or two or one for support staff that are school-based. And another focus group would be with the district's administration, central administration. You could do a separate focus group with the principals across all the schools. The last focus group we routinely do is with the Board of Education. And you're asked the same questions that all the other focus groups are asked. And so I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what it might look like. And then we can work together to figure out how many you want to do and what those groups would consist of. The way we typically do focus groups, and maybe it's less of a problem actually in the virtual environment, but the way we're doing the focus groups in the virtual environment is that they are invited people into the room. Just like tonight, you have people who are invited to be in the room. So, and I would certainly not be identifying, typically you have 12 to 15 people in a focus group. We would work with you to identify who those 12 to 15 were, but that's all open for discussion. But and they typically are 45 minutes long to an hour long, and we can get through our questions in that period of time.
Okay. Dan, can John jump? Oh, okay. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Megan.
Okay, so
Sorry, I just real quick. So
Okay.
I'm hearing about the focus group thing is starting to crystallize. We at one point as a board had talked about doing like listening sessions, which I feel like is fundamentally different from a focus group. Would you feel like if we were to consider doing some kind of community listening session that was just broad, where inevitably there will be input about the superintendent search, is that going to just mess things up? Is that something we should stay away from? Or do you feel like that's non-threatening to the process?
Well, so let me make sure I understand what you were looking at doing, is to have an opportunity for the board to engage with community groups or groups of stakeholders. And I heard you to say that it was broader than the superintendent search. Is that correct?
That's correct. A few months ago, we had a listening session that the community really wanted. And in that session, there were comments made from community members and including from some people representing stakeholder groups about the superintendent search process. And I'm not even sure that we as a board are going to do this, but I just want to make sure that, is that something that we should just pause while we focus on just like the focus group piece? Or do you feel like that is non-threatening if that's something we decided to do as a board?
Well, here's what just off the top of my head, my advice to you would be, I don't see anything wrong with, let me back up. I have worked with boards as a superintendent to develop unique engagement strategies to collect input from community members around specific questions. Priority areas the district is focusing on, what are your ideas as we deal with a difficult budget? I mean, I'm just making up things right now. I'm a proponent of boards using engagement strategies and going out into the community, and I've worked with boards as a superintendent to do that work. But I'm also a proponent of having defined purposes for that work and defined set of questions. And so if you have a need to do that, and that's entirely up to you, I don't think that it necessarily has to conflict with the superintendent focus group search process, focus groups. But I would advise you to do those sessions with a set of prescribed questions that you're trying to get input on. And you could update them on where the search is at. And part of what we should do, and if they have input, you would collect the input. In other words, I'm saying to you, don't have those listening sessions be about the search. Have them be about important work that you're doing. And then if something comes up about the search, you collect it and you share it with me so we can incorporate it into the input that you have.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you explaining that.
Okay.
I do have another quick question. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it looks like we are planning on doing focus groups the 18th and 19th of May, which is really just right around the corner. Is that something you are wanting to settle tonight? Or is that something, we may need to think about for a few days and possibly meet again next week to firm up?
I want to work with you in a way that you're going to be comfortable with every date, eventually comfortable with every date. That May 18th, 19th can be changed. I mean, I just gave you a date, a set of dates to help you see how this whole process could move along. And none of it's cast in concrete at this point. And I would ask, let's be flexible with each other through the full search. So if there needs to be a change on a date when you would do the final round of interviews, let's do to make it work for everybody.
Okay, and thank you. And John has a question also.
Dan, could you walk us through what a standard focus group meeting would look like? Summarize it.
I can certainly do that. And I did provide you a handout, but I know that, so let me just get that material out. I've got it. Our goal in doing focus groups is twofold. One is to develop the qualities of your next superintendent, which leads to a profile that we put into all your advertising. So that's one of the purposes. The second purpose of those focus groups is to collect information about the assets of your school district and your community. What do I mean about the word assets? What I mean is what would compel a superintendent candidate who isn't in your community to want to think about your job, think about your position that you have available. And so that's part of what we collect ideas from people to be able to market in those brochures and anything else that we communicate about what would compel a superintendent candidate to want to step into your community. So what I provided you was a set of questions that we routinely ask. And the way that's done is I would facilitate those unless we had some other desire. So the questions are, what is unique or special about the school district? That's an asset question. What are the challenges facing the school district? Trying to get a sense of because superintendent candidates are going to want to know those things. And there's a way you frame those to not appear like huge deficits, because every school district has challenges. The third question is, if you can improve one thing about the district, what would that be? That's getting that input about what are areas that people are interested in improvement for the school district. That can help is because, if you have a coalescing around a couple of ideas or themes there, and you have candidates that have experience in working in those areas, that's good information to sort out if you have a match at the end. What changes might the district community face over the next 5 years? You know, what is the community going through? What is the district going through? What are your short-term expectations and long-term expectations for the new superintendent? There's a lot of good themes that emerge from that question. And I can tell you that it's not uncommon to hear, although we may hear different things if these are the questions that we ask, it's not uncommon to hear that they want a superintendent that will come in and look about who they are and then initiate new ideas for reform. So I'm just telling you sometimes how that type of question can play out. The seventh question is, what are the selling points of the school district and community? That's one of those asset-based questions. What advice would you give to the new superintendent? Really interesting information comes forward, again, around what kind of, I mean, that's really a quality of profile question for your next superintendent. And then we have a catch-all other comments. So those are the questions that we are typically asking. Is that responsive to your question, John?
Yeah, I want to add to it as well. Do you put, I mean, since if we have a number of them, let's say we have 10 focus groups, and not all board members are going to be able to attend all of them, and if we do, then we have to post the meeting, and it'd be posted anyways, but do you put a greater weight on any of the questions or the responses that you get back depending upon the group? And the reason I ask that question is that, you know, I guess I'm a little concerned if I, you know, hear, yeah, we get this group of people that say that from this area that they want this type of a candidate, but yet the staff is telling us something completely different. I guess how do you weigh the surveys that come in, or do you just put them all in a pile and tally them up?
Well, what I'm typically looking for are themes that emerge. And typically what we do is, because we want, and again, I need to talk to you about this piece of it as well, because what you described earlier is quite a bit different than what the WSB process typically is. We can work to change that process, but we treat responses confidentially. And what I develop, I'll have the full range of responses, but what I develop at the end is one document across all the focus groups based on themes that emerge across all of them. The piece that we haven't talked about yet is typically they have not directly involved the board, our focus groups. We can figure that out. I'll work with you on that. And the reason for that is you want people to come and air what's on their mind. And sometimes if there's this kind of differential in authority, people may be hesitant to share what's on their mind. If you feel strongly about having board presence, I'll work with you to make that happen. I just wanted you to hear the way we typically do it. At the same time, I know that you said that all board members couldn't be at all of them. If you wanted presence at all of them, I would ask you to assign a couple people for each of them, to not have that many board members, because this is a chance for the stakeholders to speak. And again, you may feel different, and I've already told you I'll work with you to have board members involved. If I felt that it overall compromised the whole process, I would say that to you. But I think I know why you need that. I know why you desire that. Let's figure out a way to have it kind of a balanced way to do it. So John, to your question, is I'm looking for themes that run across all the input. I cannot include in my summary document every particular individual view, and there will be individual views that are expressed. But what I'm trying to present to you, and in turn for our recruitment of the next superintendent, is an overarching set of messages that have come through the focus groups.
Megan?
Thank you. Would it, in piggybacking off of what John asked, is it possible, or how would you advise us going forward with eliciting feedback from like specifically our BEA, like our teachers union and our secretarial union? I think it's really important. I think what John's getting at is we want to make sure that it's clear what the community wants, but also what our staff wants, because we have to be responsive to the needs of our teachers and our administrators.
Yeah.
Would you advise for or against maybe just doing a specific survey to our district that is maybe like that we get a separate report out on versus like a survey of the community? Or how would you best recommend going about making sure our teachers' voices are heard?
So the work that I've been doing with these focus groups, I would say to you about 2/3 of them are staff focus groups. And so they do weigh heavily. And that's not only WSB's perspective, but that's the way these other school boards wanted it to be done. If you're going to go out into the community, well, just to go back to who could other groups be that you would involve. Typically, what we've done you can do a parent group across the entire district. You can do a community group across the entire community. And some districts that I've worked with have done a combined parent and community group. In the end, you'll figure out which groups you want to do. I'll work with you on that, but I'm not going to say to you that 6 of these must be this and 2 of them must be that. That's your decision to make. If I see a problem with it, I'll point it out. But it's not unusual to have about 2/3 of the groups be staff compared to, outside groups. And then the other thing I would say to you, that if it was the desire of the board to have focus group directly with the associations, that can be done too. Those are all decisions that you'll work with me to make. I mean, you'll make those decisions.
I appreciate that. I just think we have to keep in mind, like what you said earlier, that a lot of this is going to be a trust exercise with our community. And I just want to make sure that we take advantage of this opportunity to build that relationship.
I think that's the best way to look at this process. Yes, it's about input on the superintendent search, but more so it's about a way to engage with the community and have it focus on trust. I'm entirely with you. So to go back and to interrupt me if you have questions to the timeline. So again, pay less attention to the dates, but one value of the dates is it shows you how things should be spread apart. So do they have to be on any of these specific dates? No, but we also have to spread things apart to get various things done. So we have our planning meeting tonight. If you want to have another planning meeting, we can certainly do that. A thought I have is, and I've been thinking about this around kind of the timeline and the fact that you have a pool of candidates to start from. And I did have an opportunity to get some information from Sue and Joanne about transferring those candidates over to WSB. And what I want you to know about that is that as soon as they close, the resumes will come to WSB with the essay questions, because one of the things we'll have to visit whether or not you have sufficient essay question input already. And I wasn't aware of that prior to that opportunity to discuss that with them. But a thought I had, and you have to tell me what you think of this idea. When we could do the posting right away, like around that May 6th date, with the idea that that way we could start the WSB recruitment process, with the idea that we're going to then do the engagement, and it could change a little bit about how the profile ends up being written for the final recruitment documents. So I thought about that as a way that we don't have to wait so long to do a posting out of WSB. So do it soon, and then be open to how the wording might change based on the input that you receive. And we could explain that to those focus groups that we needed to get this information out there. We could also wait to do the posting. Then we would go into do focus groups. And again, you see those dates, those can be changed. We could then actually concurrently around the same time do the community survey. And I know that there was a question that was raised earlier about that survey about adding open-ended questions, and yes, we can add a few of those for you. But that can happen concurrently, because the way that it ends up working is we provide the survey through a link, and you would post that link on your website and any other communications that you typically do to get that survey, to get information out to stakeholders. So if you have a way to inform all parents about the survey, you would do that. You would provide them the link. All that information comes back to WSB. After it closes, it's very quickly compiled for you. And so then we would do the survey. Then we would have the brochure and essay questions posted, the essay question posted for the applicants. And so it may be a little confusing, but the way we're going to work on the WSB end with the applicants is there's really a two-part process for them to apply. And with the applicants, once they're transferred over to WSB, meaning me, I'm going to contact all of them individually and to help them through the WSB application process. And I want to assure you that there will be a personal touch with each one of them, because what we don't want to, I don't know who they are. I don't think you know who they are. But what you don't want to do is you want to keep the pool expansive to the time that you're meeting to select your candidates for interview. I mean, there's no reason to let things drop off just because of this transfer. And so I'll work with them directly on a one-to-one basis. And what I'll tell them to do is to go into the WSB application process. I'll tell them how to do it, to complete the profile. The profile is the kind of the resume, the application process, just to get them jump-started, and so they're not feeling that there's time kind of waning here, waxing and waning. And then once we have the essay questions completed, I'll work back with the candidates for them to complete the second part of the application process for WSB. The first part is a generic application. In other words, it's not specific to Beloit. The second part is quite specific to Beloit. It's the essay questions, it's the references that they want to bring in, and it's also the set of legal questions regarding sexual abuse and sexual harassment. So my point to you is I'll work with each of those candidates through the reapplication process. And then we'll establish what that application deadline is. I'll meet with you to review those applicants. You'll have 10 days, 2 weeks to review them. You'll have a rubric to review them against, and we'll have a meeting, and I'll take you through a process of helping you to decide who you want to interview. And then you'll go through the first round of interviews. That shows now is July 23rd and 24. And at the second night of those interviews, you'll select who you want to bring back for the final round. Our recommendation is typically you bring in 6 in the first round. That's not a hard and fast number. If you're saying, boy, I'd love to see these 7, see the 7. We'll have to figure out how we schedule it. But the second night of those interviews, and so oftentimes what we'll do is the first night, if we did 6, you'd do 4 on the first night, and you do 2 on the second, so you have a good amount of time to process and make a decision about who you want to bring back. In between the first round and the second round, we would do background checks and reference, or I can do it later on or at another time. But WSB would do the background check part of it. Criminal background check, financial background check, educational background check. And we recommend that board members, typically assigned to a couple, do the reference calls. I'll help you with all of that. Then you would do your final round of interviews. You would decide if you want to do a site visit. And you would do that with your preferred final candidate. Some boards do that, some boards don't do that. And then you would make final selection, negotiate the contract, and have an announcement. So we need to, I mean, that's kind of the flow. I also gave you, and I'm not going to spend any time on it tonight other than to let you know that you have another document. It's called a checklist. And what that checklist, it's really good because it just kind of takes you from the beginning of the search to the end of the search, not with a lot of wording, but with more detail than what you see on the timeline.
Kyle.
Without having to confirm these dates, I mean,
I'm sorry, Dan, John has a question. Can we jump in really quick?
you can take whatever time you want to.
And then I would say from now on, go ahead and jump in if you have a question, because I'm looking at everything too, and I don't feel like I'm paying enough attention looking around. So if you have a question after this, go ahead and just jump on in.
Dan, I'm not sure if the rest of the board knows this, but the posting's been out there since March 11th. And in that period of time, there's probably some candidates that have been waiting for, the closing, which is, I think, the 30th was the initial date, or tomorrow.
That's correct.
And then we have to shift them over to the WSB website, and then potentially having to reapply again. I want everybody to understand that, some of these candidates we have to be aware of. We can't just leave them hanging out there for an unlimited period of time. They're going to skate, or they're going to find other positions. Not that that's, we don't have to interview every person, but I just want to make everyone very clear on that. I was going to ask you one other thing, Dan, was if we went to more of a national search, are there rules, regulations, policies, procedures that are different in Wisconsin that people from around the country may not be aware of coming into the state of Wisconsin if they were to transfer, that you find that are different? Because I think that from state to state, it is very different.
What would be an example of something that could be different?
Well, I'm just asking the question. It could be the funding from the state, how things are, that type of thing.
Sure. Well, you're certainly right about that. Although kind of in a general pattern across our entire country, especially in the Midwest, yes, those formulas are different, and yes, they're very much the same in terms of my view, my opinion, I'll label it, not being adequate funding for children. And so there are nuanced things that are different, and part of it is, there's nothing, if I understand your question correctly, John, there's nothing that really would inhibit, because of those differences, from people applying. So I don't see that as being a major barrier. And most quality superintendents are savvy enough to, if they're coming into Beloit, to learn a great deal about the state of Wisconsin and to learn about the Beloit school district ahead of time. And so they're going to come in with a set of questions as well that they need some help to sort out. The other thing is, in particular, as we get down to the 6, let me assure you that, well, this is a piece I don't think I said. When in my discussion with Sue and Joanne, what I asked them to do was to wait till the posting closed on your end, and then, if possible, the next day to get them to me. So it's 30th, and then the first they would come to me. I intend to start calling those candidates right away to see if we can, the goal is to keep them in the pool until you have a chance to look at them. And so I'm going to do everything within my power to encourage, to help them with the application process, to support them through the application process. There's somebody in the WSB office by name of Sally Schweitzer who does a lot of the detail work around applications. She's a great resource for candidates. And so know that I'm going to work very, very hard to not have any loss in that candidate pool. And yet, if that happens, I certainly would report that back out to you. But in terms of, I'm not too worried about those differences because they do exist. And superintendents, my last superintendency was in Michigan, and that was my first time venturing out of the state of Wisconsin, both living as well as professionally. And I found a lot of similarities within those differences. And so I don't see it as an inhibitor, if that's a concern.
Thanks, Dan.
So how do we?
I'm sorry. I think you. I'm sorry, Sue.
Sorry. Dan, I just wanted to just kind of reiterate the importance of the timeline with the posting, because ours has been up about 7 to 8 weeks. And if I looked at your timeline, and I know you said you would try to condense it a little bit, back it up a little bit, even looking at your timeline that you have currently, those candidates could possibly have been waiting for the process 14 to 16 weeks. Also, we're hitting that July 1st deadline where so many districts really do want to hire for the start of their fiscal year so that the superintendent can participate in the preparation for a school year. And if we look at like your whole timeline, you have like a starting date of after the school year begins, which means that superintendent comes into a system that's been established for the start of a school year. And that's a difficult spot for a superintendent to be in.
No, I don't disagree with you, but just please keep in mind what I presented in this timeline was more the typical process as all things would play out. If we can post this right away, we can look at a shorter window for application. I mean, it needs to be a legitimate window for application because there are different people that hang out on the WSB process than let's say the WheatCan process. And so we want to make sure, but it doesn't have to be as long as it's there. And I can work with whoever you want to designate to rearrange these timelines. My only point would be is I'll flex wherever we can flex. If it doesn't allow us to accomplish what we need to accomplish, I'll tell you that too. But I think there's a lot of flex that we can do here.
So what's the soonest do you think we could end the WASB application process?
My preference would be 3-4 weeks. That would put us into, the first part of, I guess, that first week in June from the posting. I mean, we could move it up. I mean, that's moving it up a month.
And you're only talking about just the deadline for applications to come in, right? Because I don't want us to rush into things, and moving dates up, like, as Sue was saying about like the start time of a superintendent. If it's not possible, if we don't find a good match before the start of the year, I would rather not have, someone unless we have a good candidate.
Yeah, and my greatest concern is just that's like a 15 weeks of people waiting to hear what the next step is. And there just doesn't seem to be a necessary purpose for that kind of a delay, like a 5-week. This is a 5-week posting, and that's excessive when you've already had a 7 to 8 week posting. So if there would be some ways to collapse a few of those, and some of the other things in throughout the timeline, some of those don't need a week in between every single activity. Just because of the start of a school year, you may need to do some of those things a little faster.
A lot of this ends up being left with how the board feels. I mean, if you just look at the application deadline, there's 9 days I guess in between the application deadline and when we would meet to review that, I mean, can you get it done in less number of days, a review?
I think that
Those are all things that
Dan, I want to say something here. We have a timeline here. I mean, I'm all for it. We need to do it right. We need to take our time and do that. No doubt about it. But Sue has a contract that ends on June 30th, which means we have a vacant seat and we have a lot going on. And then, which means, I mean, I understand the parallel search with the superintendent for an interim. We need to be kind of figuring this out. I mean, we can lay out the timeline here, but the more we're talking about this, the more we're going to have an empty seat on June 30th unless we can convince her differently to.
If there was an effort to get somebody on board in August at a much earlier date, I would have a willingness to stay. But to have somebody come on and start after the start of a school year, that just doesn't make sense, and it's not fair to the district to have somebody begin that's an awkward time for anyone to begin the role of superintendent. So if we could really condense it, and again, if there aren't good candidates, then you do have a whole different situation for a much longer period of time.
Go ahead, Megan.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. No, Amy was first.
Here's my concern. And I don't want to rewrite history, but to me, it did not make sense for the previous board to post the position, knowing that there were 4 open seats. With that being said, and I completely get what you're saying, Sue, about we've had people waiting for, I don't know, let's say 12 weeks, and then if we add another 5 weeks. But for anyone that has not yet applied, it is not a 17-week process. And I don't want to be bound just because this was posted early. And I also don't want to rush so we can get someone for July 1st. And I completely agree with you that starting after the beginning of the school year is definitely not ideal. It is not fair to the superintendent or to the district. I think now may be a good time, at least it feels that way to me, to talk about logistically, what does it look like? We start this race, we realize we don't have the candidate that meets our need. We've done a parallel search with an interim. So do we go dormant and then pick back up in the spring if that is the scenario? What does that look like?
From my perspective, you would go dormant for a period of time, and it would be very early spring that you would want to be able to get into the mix of superintendent candidates for the following July 1. I just don't want you to think spring is April again. You want to get into that end of January, February window where, superintendents are making a decision to look elsewhere if it's not their first superintendency. So yeah, I mean yes, you would go dormant for a while. That I did that in another district. They went dormant as they had their interim in place, and then they picked back up their search, and that's the district where the superintendent, after the search was halfway through, made the decision to stay. And so what they've done is they've put it on hold for 2 years now.
So my question was, would it be possible to post for an interim and a superintendent position at the same time with that same August deadline, like Sue is suggesting, because it wouldn't make sense for somebody, to start in the middle of the year, and then draw from the interim candidate pool if we don't find a satisfactory candidate, and then do what you just described, let it stay dormant, and then start the search over at the appropriate time. Is there interest in doing that?
If I could, I would not advise you to post both of them at the same time, because that's going to be a disincentive for people that are interested in the permanent position.
When would be the right time to post the interim posting if that's what we decide to do?
Well, first of all, based on what Sue has shared, and I do understand those concerns, and I've already said I think there's flexibility in this, but I also want to make sure that if I see any overall compromise, that I'm communicating that with you. I don't know that we'll ever be at that point. I think if you don't feel whatever timeline is going to get you to where you want to get, I think you should be considering the idea of an interim for next school year, which may be far from ideal. But I would strongly advise you not to post concurrently both positions.
So what
May
does
I,
the, yeah, go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy. I've been looking at the documents, and I honestly am feeling that we're rushing. I'm also very concerned about, in this time of COVID, being able to have the staff and the community input into such a major decision that we desperately, in my opinion, I shouldn't use the word desperately, but I just feel very, very strongly, as I believe all the fellow board members do, that we need that input. I'm afraid we're not going to get it to the degree, I know we won't get it to the degree that we normally would if we weren't in lockdown. And I don't know if this is even appropriate that I'm saying this, but could we perhaps look into just an interim superintendent search? I'm very concerned, as Sue said, about starting a superintendent so late in the school year. I think that sets the person up in a very bad light. Plus, again, we've got the COVID situation. So this fall is going to be something different than we've ever seen in the history of starting our schools up in the fall, because our kids have been out of school for over 2 months.
Yeah, I totally get it. I mean, I totally have empathy for that timeline. The only thing I would want to say to you is the focus groups that have been done virtually by WSB have gone pretty well. I mean, there's been a lot of good input provided, and maybe one idea that just popped into my brain, it may not be a good idea, is you go through those focus groups around the superintendent search virtually, and you announce at the same time that when things open up, that you're going to do your series of engagements as a board, so the community can see that there's going to be other opportunities for them to interact with you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dan, have you ever done any virtual forums with a community such as ours? We have as you know, we have a very high poverty rate. I'm concerned about the technology being available in everyone's home, and I want to give everybody the same opportunity to participate. And when you take that away from, being on lockdown, it's just a very unique and unfortunate situation we're in right now.
Well, I very much agree. And, there needs to be a separate conversation, and I'll use the word underrepresented groups, about how that strategy can be built into these focus groups. And I think there are constraints. Clearly there are. But there's got to be a way that we can work through some of this through maybe organizations that people are part of, and I just don't know exactly how it would work in your community, but that is certainly something you want to pay attention to. I agree.
Thank you, Dan. And Amy, I apologize. Thank you for letting me speak.
Okay, Amy and then Joanne.
If we were to move to an interim search and press pause on looking for a superintendent, what would that communication look like to individuals who have already applied?
That communication would be to let them know that decision has been made, that let them know when that position would open up again for a permanent placement, which I would assume would be, that early spring, and to encourage people to remain interested in the position.
And then specifically, is there a process to, if I was interested in becoming the superintendent and now I'm made aware of this change, can those applications be rolled over to the pool for interim? Of course, if the candidates are interested.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely they could be. And I can also tell you that having done an interim at the beginning of this current school year, that I have some knowledge about people that are interested in only interim positions. That more than happy to make contacts to see if that's your decision.
This is Joanne, real quick. I just wanted to clarify one item that Amy had brought up about the prior board and making these decisions and being cornered into it. Just to give a little clarification for context, there was a planning session with the prior board, and this search was originally to be done by the board and the current interim superintendent and myself running with this through the board. They did not want to use a search firm. They were going to use a la carte services from WASB, and the outgoing board was very aware of the incoming potential for new board members, and that is why the closing date was put after the election. So all of those applicants would be reviewed and selected and done. The opening was open to everyone. We kept it open for that extended period. And this change to now using WASB became another board decision that was made by the outgoing board to make it this way. This was done by our group, HR, and the interim superintendents at that point, because the board at that point made it very clear they wanted a regional search only. So there was not going to be a huge national search, because they felt very strongly after the last couple superintendent searches that regional was what they wanted. They wanted someone from the Midwest. They wanted mostly Wisconsin. The 17 applicants we have right now, there are only 2 that are not regional. They are all from our regional area. And I just want to clearly let everybody know, no one has reviewed those applications other than I have made sure they meet minimum qualifications. But in the effort to make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity, we have not shared those with anyone until the closing date, which the original decision was that would all be shared with the board with the initial idea behind this posting is that at this point, the board would have gotten all 17 complete applications, and this board would have made those decisions. After speaking with Dan, we are now going to send those resumes and the weekend applications to him so that he can reach out to those people. But I just want to make sure that there's not a conception that the old board tried to force something. This was a different search when the original planning went through, and we were trying to keep in mind that a new board would probably be in place during the hiring and take that into consideration. And that's why I was very adamant, if you had seen any of our other meetings on this, that I would not share application data with any of the board until it was closed, because I did not want unfair advantage or contacts going out to any applicant prior to the new board or whoever's in place when everyone's getting a fair screening. I didn't want any contact outside of our process of what the board wanted to follow. So I know that was a little more than what you want, but I wanted to just put some context so people could understand what this process looked like in the beginning, and if we're changing to national. But I don't want you to necessarily disregard the applicants that we have, that some of them did apply. I mean, I had 16 yesterday, so yes, the one that has applied today is not waiting 6 to 8 weeks. But you did have applicants that put in that first week. And if they've done that full weekend application and their essay questions on that, and then they need to have Dan contact them and do this generic application, and then in another 2 or 3 weeks, go in again and do a complete application with more essay questions. It's just a long time, and I'm not discouraging it. I just want to make sure, as Sue was saying, people understand that you may have quality candidates. I want to give the board opportunity to look at those, but at this point, I will not, unless we have a decision made, I won't be forwarding those applications to you. I will be forwarding them to Dan to start the process with WASB because it's no longer our search. It is being run by WASB. So I will let you know how many people have applied, but Dan will work with WASB and the board to share applicants with you.
So I'm hearing, so there's concern about the deadline and when the new superintendent would potentially be starting. So I guess in my mind, how I think, do we have to kind of pinpoint when we'd want the search to be concluded and then work back timelines from there?
Right.
Or other people have, brought up that this process feels very fast. So I guess we need to decide from a board as to when would we want the new superintendent seated, and then work backwards from there. Or more discussion about thoughts about where we are and what we've learned about potential deadlines and everything.
I have a question mainly directed for Sue and Dan. I get that ideally we would want a superintendent in place by July 1st. What do you feel is the latest date that could happen, and that superintendent still have the ability to come in feeling fully informed and engaged, and that his or her input is a part of this current school year? Because my concern is I don't think that date is that much past July 1st. Bless you. And if it's at or around July 1st, that basically gives us 2 months realistically to go through this entire process. Am I missing something?
I had a hard time hearing you. I'm sorry.
What is the latest, in your opinion, we could seat a superintendent and still have that person feel like they had genuine input and an impact on the current school year?
I think it would be around the first mid of June. And I'm thinking about all the things that need to be done to get you to that point, which are considerable. But I think, and that's not ideal, but most superintendents start July 1. Most superintendents have the benefit of knowing that they've been hired a number of weeks before that time. And to start engaging with staff, coming into the community to meet with people. That's going to be quite abbreviated, even under a very altered schedule, which we can. I like where Kyle was going with that. This can be altered. You can look at a different end date, and we can work back from there. But that would be how I would respond to it, which is not the best of circumstances. Is a manageable circumstance overall? Yes, with the kind of support from the board, behind that candidate, and to be able to have that candidate come in and take that first year and not that you wouldn't want it any other way, but as a listening and learning year, allowing your initiatives to move forward, but to have the patience of of time because they don't have the time to be able to develop the relationships on the early end.
Sue, what do you think?
Yeah, if you look at the calendar, that Monday, August 3rd is at least a 3-week window before teachers return. It's 5 weeks before the student start date. That at least would give a fairly decent window with a very strong cabinet. Principals will be hired in place and ready to go, and I would be able to stay and support that person to get started.
What was the dates that you mentioned?
That Monday, August 3rd.
Dan, question, and I think that Sue, when you bring that up, as I'm thinking that through, I mean, obviously, I would think for every new superintendent coming in, they would like to have that June 1st timeline or July 1st timeline to be able to come in and set the stage and kind of lay out their year the way that they want to see it. Is it, and I'm sure that's very typically the way that it's handled, but like Sue had said, if we have a strong administrative team, which I feel like we do, and I think Sue agrees with that, and we kind of lay out the land for the whole year. I mean, is it adverse, or would a superintendent search be viewed upon differently by candidates if they came in knowing that maybe that first year they wouldn't have as much input, and they would be kind of understanding the district? I mean, is there any negatives with that? I would think that there could actually be some positives with that. So that's the first part of it. The second question I had, though, was of the 17 candidates that we have, I mean, is that a large number in your opinion for this time of the year and putting that out there, or is that very typical? I mean, obviously it's going to be all over the board, but we started this process on March 11th, and we have 17. Is that a good number, a low number?
That is a very comparable number to our other searches at this point. 13 to 20, I would say. You're right. You're right in there with that.
Okay.
And if I could, I don't disagree at all with your analysis. A lot of it depends on, you had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned onboarding. Onboarding this superintendent with a later start date in the right kind of way with the right kind of expectations and can work. I mean, it can work. It's not the traditional, and it's far from ideal in some ways, but it can work.
I think we're all pretty much familiar with the current cabinet that we have in place. Sue, if you could give us a ballpark of how many principals, assistant principals, and dean positions do need to be filled, because I think it's really important to take a holistic approach when we're looking at our team. If we're having a new superintendent that may be feeling a bit rushed when they are coming in, and then we have several new principals, assistant principals, et cetera, I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, Amy, we don't have several new principals right now. We did a final round of high school principal interviews today, and tomorrow we are doing a final round of 2 of our elementary principals. So those should be coming to the board probably on the 12th, well, to the committee for personnel. So those will be in good shape as we end this school year to be ready to start the next school year. There's always the possibility that we could lose somebody over the summer, move, take a different job, that kind of thing. But right now, we do a high school retiring AP. However, we do have a little bit movement with somebody who was out on a leave. So we're looking at, that situation, and that person has a contract. So we aren't looking at a lot of hiring in that area for the summer.
So Beloit Memorial and two elementary principals. Okay.
Yep.
If I could just offer this in light of the discussion that took place, and my comment on date was more in the ideal, but one of the lights went on when I finished my last 6 years I'm just sharing this because it's kind of germane to the conversation. My last 6 years as a superintendent in Birmingham, Michigan, I started on August 1. And they were kind of pressed on a timeline, a different kind of timeline as well. And so in light of what Sue said, I'm just wondering, and again, you can certainly wrestle with that decision about interim. You heard my piece about not posting both at the same time, is if we did a final selection, were you thinking of a final selection, Sue, around August 1, August 3rd, or what were you thinking, or start date?
I was suggesting a start date.
Yeah, well, I just don't know. Because what I was going to say, to Kyle's point about working back from a date, if we could adjust this calendar in the right kind of way, and again, we do need some space between these activities. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on how pressed you're feeling as a board. I'll work with you to compress this. But, if we lop off a month from this, and see what that would look like.
And I think I'm getting the sense of the board that if we were to say that we need the new superintendent in place that August 3rd, that I think the board is prepared to start making decisions about focus groups, to continue planning every step along the way, so we're not figuring out as we arrive at each step. And I also feel like from hearing what board members do is we'd also need a clear spot, because it is so late. We would have to kind of have our, if we decided that we had not found the person who wanted to be the next superintendent, then when do we need to make that decision to pause the superintendent search and begin the interim superintendent search?
Excuse me, Kyle, it's Stephanie. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know what the correct phone etiquette is here. But Kyle, could you repeat that? You were going in and out.
I was just telling Dan that I think the board is very motivated that in order to make that August 3rd deadline work, if that's what the board agrees, that we will continue to plan every step up front as much as we can, so then it's all laid out and ready to go, so one piece can just roll after another rather than planning and kind of dealing with each step as it comes up. But then also making sure that there's a clear spot in the searching process where we realize, yes, we have people here who we would like to see in our superintendent seat, or no one's not here. We need to pause the superintendent search and start an interim superintendent search, because that August 3rd is also, we don't want to be doing an interim superintendent search then either.
No. Thank you.
One thing that I could do quietly is to work with and I have some names already, given that other interim search I did, about who all is out there on interim. And it's not that you're doing both at the same time, but I could find out what that candidate pool might look like should you have to cut in that direction. So it's not like you would have to, can help you in that way. I would want to do that to find out. And I don't know that you typically want to think around an interim from the pool that are interested in the long-term position. If somebody's in the community already, that might work. But if they're not in the community, you don't want to make a commitment to somebody just likely for 1 year and then, go back through a search. I mean, it worked out nicely in that other district I referenced because they found somebody that they really wanted to keep, and in the end, she decided to stay.
Okay.
So I'm saying, I could work to find out who might be sitting out there and interested, if that's what you would want from me.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Looking at this schedule that you have, I'm kind of curious because if we have 17 applicants right now, not that all of them are, I mean, it sounds like they're all qualified. And if we want to do more of a national search, I mean, we have a full month on this schedule that you have between the time that the brochure and essay questions are posted to the application deadline. And knowing that we have 17 more, I mean, are we looking to get another 17 applicants? Is that it? I mean, could we condense that down? I mean, I'm seeing 4 weeks there.
It could be condensed down, but it may not yield as much as if it was longer. But yes, it could be done. And if you can work with me on kind of identifying the back date, I can go back and kind of rework this in a way, and then share it with you to see if you're comfortable with it. But I think you need to settle on what would that back date be, and then I would advise you whether or not it's doable. I mean, I would work very hard to make it doable.
So Sue had recommended that August 3rd. So I'm looking to the board. How do you feel about that August 3rd target date?
I'll just be blunt. I feel like after the trauma we have survived, it feels very uncomfortable to be on a plane and we're trying to figure out how to strap the wings on. So for me, only person I can speak for, it's a huge red flag with this many questions of, okay, if we do this, how can we make this work? And if we backdate this, how can we make this work? I do not want this process to be or be perceived, or both, as rushed. And if we're spending all of this time figuring out how to make this timeline work and not into, and I get that the bulk of this will come later, into who is the right fit for us, for me, that's a huge red flag that we need to find an interim, and then we need to start this early spring, like end of January, and do this properly where we can focus on finding the right person and not compressing the timeline.
I wouldn't disagree with all of that. I think that, but one thing I want to make very clear, having gone through the previous search, and I know that everybody's going to put a target on my back and Kyle's back that we did a very lousy job. The process we went through, I will stand behind wholeheartedly. I think that the process that we went through previously started in November, and we began the process with candidates in January and February. We went step by step exactly through the process. It was a national search, and we started in time. We had a huge pool of candidates. I think there was 50 applications. Was that right, Michelle? And you don't know what you're going to get. And I know that everybody thinks, oh, this time it's going to be different, and I hope to God it is. But I just want to let everybody know that just because you take the time to do it doesn't mean you're going to get the premier candidate. I think that, if there's a way that we could roll into, whether it is an interim, if there's candidates in the 17 that potentially are looking to go down that road, they're willing to do that, or you have a pool, Dan, you had mentioned, of candidates as well. I mean, I'd be all for that, to say this is the process. Who knows? Maybe we find an intern that's really looking to take that next step, and then once we get them in the community, and with hopefully the positive change that we're experiencing now and will continue to, that they'd want to stay.
Thanks. I just want to piggyback off of actually both of those comments. I think it's critical because of what we've experienced and what we know about how the search process works and what we've experienced as a district. I think that paramount to all of this has to be the time necessary to get the input, particularly from our teachers, because I think that what I've heard when we're sort of reflecting, I know like Jeff Klett's comments were like, we need to focus on relationships. Like we've had a lot of time to debrief as a board, but I think our community and our district needs like that voice and that time to like rethink all this. There's a reason we're not going with the previous profile, and it's because we want to start fresh, and people have experienced this past year. So I just think that we need to like honor the fact that everybody, every stakeholder in our community, parents, teachers, everybody needs to have that time to sort of like look at these questions that you've put together and consider them in light of what we've learned. So if it's possible to do that, awesome. But I don't want to do something for the sake of we have to have it done by a date. If we can do it, that's awesome. But we have to honor that time.
And then very briefly, the only other point that I think that is very important is that the person we need to start this school year might be very different than the person we need to start the next school year. Keep in mind, we are still in the middle of a global pandemic. We don't even know if our students are coming back this school year. So perfect scenario is if we could find someone who is a rock star in distance learning, et cetera. That may be what we need for this moment, and that, I mean, I think this pandemic has shown us, we need to be able to pivot, but we may be looking at two different criteria sets for what we need now and what we need long term.
Just one other thought for in reaction to what John had shared. You know, I think the problem isn't so much the overall events that have to occur to find a superintendent. It's where you are on the calendar that's the problem. Because you're not, I mean, it's possible to find a good superintendent. And we could make accommodations with this timeline, but it's not the ideal timeline. I mean, from where it would start. I mean, what I heard John describe previously is much more of an ideal start to end time than what you're faced with right now. That's your biggest issue from my perspective.
Yep, go ahead,
May
Stephanie.
I speak, Mr. President?
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Go ahead. Okay, thank you. I agree with what Amy said. I'm entering this meeting in good faith, and I also agree with what Dan just said about the timeline. We are on a very narrow timeline, and I'm only speaking for myself and my own personal experience. In the past, when I've tried to do a hire too fast, it's not always great. We also have a brand new board. I've only been on it 6 months. We've got a lot of new people. I think we've got an excellent board, but I think we're putting a lot of pressure on everyone to try and get this done right now. And Amy also has a very valid point. We're in the middle of a global pandemic. Everything's different. Nothing is normal right now. I guess I'm just feeling very strongly that, and I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but I'm feeling very strongly we should table this and look for an interim. Thank you.
Okay, so I feel like we're starting to circle the drain. We're kind of coming back to stuff. So there are two things I'm really hearing from the board. Concern over I think everybody wants the superintendent to be successful. They don't want the search process to be used against that person, saying, oh, it's in the middle of COVID. It wasn't the same search experience we would have had without this if it wasn't all done virtually. Then also the rush timeline. So I'm hearing more of an interest of pausing the superintendent search and looking more for an interim. But that's a decision the board has to make. So I'm not going to lead anyone down a path, but we're able to act on anything on the agenda. And if, again, channeling my inner Jeff Klett, I don't want to be here all night circling this, keep going around in a circle and talking around in a circle.
Can we just sort of poll everybody to see where we're leaning? Would that be appropriate?
Sure. So I'll go down my list. Okay. So Stephanie, I think you made very clear your stance. Is there anything you would like to add?
I'm having a very, very difficult time hearing. I'm so sorry.
Okay. So, Stephanie, we're just taking a quick poll to kind of see where everybody is at. I'm hearing a lot of concern about rushing a timeline, and then how the validity of the search is perceived by the community, and as well as the possible outcome of the search. And I'm hearing a greater interest for an interim superintendent, which you just said. But I just want to check in with each board member, and I wanted to know if there's anything you wanted to add to your previous statement.
No, thank you, but thank you for the opportunity.
Okay. Amy, is there anything you would like to?
I would like to see us move forward with an interim and to restart this process in January of 2021.
Okay. Maria?
I also support the hold off on the superintendent and go for an interim right now. I think right now we're going through very difficult times. All of this is new to everyone. I really want that community engagement. I want everyone to be able to be engaged in this superintendent search. And I don't think it's going to be possible. Even if it is, it's not going to be fully possible to the extent where they'll be able to actually participate. So yes, I go with the hold and interim.
Okay. John?
I propose that we keep Sue on for another year, and then I'm for the going for an interim. Once again, I caution. I think that I'm real curious to know the candidates that we have, if any of them are interested in that position. Having gone through the process again, and I think that we saw a lot of great people, and we'll probably see a lot of great new people. And unfortunately, you don't know what always lies underneath the people that you talk to. I just want to caution everybody on that, because, and I hope that if we do this process, that the staff and administration, I think we have a different team in place now. So I'm hopeful that they will be able to stay together and do everything. It's good to know that the principles are all intact at this point. So yeah, I'd be for that. I would like to know, if we could, is there a process with the current candidates to be able to bring them into the mix, and would they have an interest? And maybe they wouldn't. So I would go for that.
Spencer?
There's a lot of good valid points made tonight about rushing, because honestly, the school district, we need that superintendent that's going to be that rock, that's going to bring the school back together, bring that trust that all the staff wants, and provide the leadership for that staff to provide a good education for our students. And as Amy pointed out, we are in a pandemic where next year, it could be a completely different situation on what we're looking for. And we're not going to be able to get that community input that we need right now. And I believe that that's really what the community wants. They want their voice to be heard right now. And we can't really give that to them. So I'd be willing to wait for a while.
And last but not least, Megan.
I'm just going to echo everything that every board member has said, because I share those opinions, and I also voice my opinion for delaying and just doing an interim search.
Okay, so after an informal poll, I would feel that we would need a motion to make it official.
I move that we table the search for a superintendent, and that we pursue finding an interim superintendent for the 2021 school year, with the understanding that we will restart our search in January of 2021.
I second that.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and it looks like Joanne has some discussion.
I just have one clarifying question, is if we move forward and the board does go for the interim, what stance do you want us to take with the 17 applicants? Am I going to forward those to WASB to search for an interim? am I reaching out and saying this position is being suspended as a permanent position, but we would be having it as an interim? I would like to know where the board would like to go with that decision.
For consistency, I think it would be appropriate for WASB to handle that, for you to transfer all applications and supporting documents to Dan, and I think he will capably handle that.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Do we need to reconsider the contract then, the language of the contract, if we take this step and moving forward and we're going to have WASB take on the interim search?
WSB would be happy to provide you a different contract that would connect to the interim search. And I know we did that in the other district that have been referencing. First, there was an interim contract, then there was the regular contract for the search. And as I sit here with you tonight, I can't recall how they varied. I'd have to dig those out. But we would be happy to do that if that's what you desire us to do to support you.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, go ahead.
If we can just amend the motion or whatever so that I have that clear direction. I just want to make sure that we close things out transparently as well, so it's in the record that we have taken our role out of this for the selection or the change of the recruitment process.
Okay, so I would need a motion to amend the original motion to direct administration, HR, to provide the names of the applicants to WASB and let them handle that from there. So is there a motion for the amendment?
I move to amend my previous motion to specifically direct Ms. Armstrong to pass on all application and supporting documentation to WASB for the interim superintendent search.
And is there a second for the amendment?
Second.
Okay, so I don't know how many are familiar with this. So now we have an amendment. So we're going to vote only on the amendment to direct Joanne to provide WASB with the applicant information. And then we'll vote a second time on the amended motion, which would then suspend the superintendent search and pick it up later. Okay? So all in favor of the amendment only. I'm sorry, is there any discussion or questions about the amendment? John?
I just have a question about the contract to make sure that we're contractually bound with WASB for the interim search. We've been under the contract for the superintendent search. So I don't want to get the cart in front of the horse here.
You know, today, just so you know, we don't have back, unless it came today to WSB, we don't have back the signed contract from you on the regular search.
It was approved by our board, though.
No, I do know that, but I mean, there hasn't been a full meeting of the minds because I don't think WSB has it. I've been checking every day with them at the office because the way it works is the board president on your end signs it and then John Ashley signs it. I just want you to know that that's a piece of it here.
And that's fine. I like I said, I'm not trying to belabor this at all. I just want to make sure that, you know, we had a contract before, the board had approved that. I know we're looking to table that, and that's fine. But before we move forward with the interim, do we need to have a motion to approve the contract? We don't even know what we're signing up for right now. I mean, we were signed up for no more than 12,000. I'm assuming the interim is going to be considerably less than that.
Oh, no question about it. And I mean, we wouldn't go through any of the engagement piece. What I would be mainly doing is assembling a pool of candidates for you, both off of what has been submitted as well as what we have knowledge of, about interim candidates. I would work with you on an interview process. I would work with you on a first round. There would be a second round, and frankly, you're going to pay, and you're going to pay the hourly rate for those services. And so, please understand that it will be significantly less. And we can get to redefining that new contract as quickly as tomorrow.
So after this motion were to pass, I just want to make sure we would be okay to act if after we vote on these, the amendment and then the amended motion, if then we would be able to make a motion then to negotiate a contract for an interim superintendent search if we'd be covered under the agenda item. I mean, that would have to follow. Okay. All right. Any other discussion or questions on the amendment? Okay. See none. All in. Oh, Joanne. You have a lot to say tonight.
I'm so sorry. I just want to make sure, I don't want to, hinder this process at all. With that, I know you're going to look at going to negotiations with WASB for the interim, and I'm trying to put on my business hat and my HR hat here, so bear with me for a minute. But should I, and I think the board needs to, if you're going to negotiate a contract with WASB for the interim, that isn't a commitment at this point to that. Should I, the intention is by Friday, I would be sending them all the applicants. I don't know if that is appropriate if we do not have a agreement with WASB. I mean, I have no problem holding those until we do have that agreement. But I worry about not having some contact with these applicants. I'm very fearful of losing. I will tell you, that's a big thing that I have is I think you've got 17 candidates and not knowing, other than that they're qualified, I don't know what you have, and I don't want this board to lose opportunity. So we are really trying to work really hard from the HR standpoint now of rebuilding relationships and getting good candidates and good feedback that we are a nice place to work and we're not going to conduct business the way things had been done in the past. So we are doing a lot more outreach with our candidates and trying to build that relationship before they come in, even for their first interview. So I want to make sure that we don't stop anyone's feelings of what, anybody can Google us right now and see the yuck that we've been through. And I know I'm not, using real technical terms here, but we don't need anything else to hinder this process. And Dan and Sue and I had this conversation that when we were going to move over to WASB, I want this as seamless as possible, but I also wanted to make sure how this would be communicated to these candidates. I don't want it to appear that the board doesn't know what they're doing, that the administration doesn't know what they're doing, and how the decision was made to go from an internal search within the district handling that to WASB. And I think we had come up with a really good idea of how he would do that immediate outreach starting Friday when I send those. But I do, as an HR and the personnel side of it, I want to make sure that we're not violating those applicants by giving it to someone who is doing a search that we haven't committed to. So I've got both my hats on as the business. We need to have a valid contract, but we also don't want to lose those things. And I don't want to confuse the candidates by me calling, then him calling, then everybody's hands in it, and we just look like we're a disorganized mess. So I'm really not trying to throw wrenches in this. I just want to make sure we're thinking through the whole process, because I want this interim assignment and this superintendent search, when we do that, to be appropriate.
I think this could be solved probably in 30 seconds or less. Dan, do you believe that the negotiations for the contract for the interim superintendent can be concluded by this Friday?
Yes, I do believe I can present to you a document that would include that contract. It's a much more simpler contract, as I'm recalling. I was just looking through a file to see if I could find it right now, and I couldn't. But yeah, we could clearly work to that end, and I believe that can be accomplished. But I just want to say one thing also as well, a couple things, if I could. Number one, I don't have a signed contract, and I'm willing to engage with you as a board now. And so, I mean, some of this has to be based on trust and goodwill. And I want you to know that there's nothing that I would do to try to disaffect any of those candidates. And I had already committed to calling them right away. The other thing I would say, and I don't want to be a wet blanket and a disappointment, but I don't believe the majority of those candidates, if not all, are going to be interested in an interim position. It certainly is worth calling all of them to find that out. But those are people that are applying for permanent positions, and few people are going to, move with the idea that it might be only 1 year.
Yes, Dan, a question. Dan, for a typical interim, when you are doing the work to help find an interim, do you post, and do you post for a short period of time, like a 3 or 4 week window?
Yes, we do post. And yes, we'll have a pool that are sitting out there already, but we would want to post. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, again, the one district, and maybe it was a difference in timing, we posted that interim position for 5 days. And we had about 15 candidates in those 5 days. And so I don't want to live on that margin all the time, but it can be a very short posting. I'd probably say 2 weeks. We would post the interim position and help a pool of candidates to get going on.
So you could do a reach out to those current candidates to see if they wanted to be a part of the pool for an interim decision. And there's enough time to make that decision for an interim.
Oh, I truly believe there is.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also say, even if we did have a contract by Friday, we would have to meet, like, at least virtually to approve the contract, because just having one in hand, the board would have to approve it, and so we would have to have time for WASB to send something legal to look it over, and then the board would have to have time to look it over, and then vote as a board to approve that contract.
And that is exactly what I was going to say, and let you know that I will be here. I'm available to forward those contracts over to legal and to get everything. I want to expedite this process, and that is my endeavor, is to get these applications to Dan. I don't want you to take any of my concerns as trying to slow this process down. I am more than fine. I have enough on my plate to give this to WASB, which is why Sue and I made that recommendation, is as this got pushed, we need to get it over there. So these comments, I know a lot of the new board do not know me very well, and some may have different opinions, but I am here to assist the district and get not only myself a great boss, but this district somebody who wants to be here and has our kids in place. So please don't take any of those comments or my questions as something against slowing this process down.
This is a question for Sue. And in your opinion, in the period of time you've been here and knowing the team that you have in place administratively, what do you feel as though going the interim route, which I'm not, like I said, that's fine, but going that route, is that going to create a negative perception within the district? Obviously, we don't know who we're going to get. And do we run risk at all of potential exodus of staff members?
I think Amy made a really good point that probably one of the primary reasons for the board to make this decision is that we are in a national health crisis. And I think if we get a good interim person, and we already have a good team in place, we have the start of a new and really good board in place, I don't think it's going to be an exit kind of situation. I think people feel good right now about the school district. Staff are feeling good about the school district and feeling like we've gotten ourselves back on track a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion or comments? Okay, so we're back.
If I could give you a bit of advice, and I know it's getting late here, but to the last point that was discussed, and I don't know what services you have internally in your district, I think you may have some, is to frame a message about why this is being done for positive reasons around the time for engagement, the type of engagement you want to do, and so you can try to get ahead of it in terms of that communication.
Okay, oh shoot, my mic was on while I was sighing. Michelle once told me that was one of my telltale signs of stress was when I started sighing and put my hands over my face. Okay, so any other discussion, comments?
What's the motion and what are we voting on? I guess it's just
So
we're clear.
where we are right now is we're still on the amendment that would direct Joanne to forward all of the candidates to WASB, where they would then take over and contact them, asking if any of them would be interested in, so that they could help them through the process. If any of them would be interested in applying for the interim position, and then also like letting them know that the district has decided to go with an interim at this point. And then, depending on the amendment, then the motion would be to suspend the superintendent search and look for an interim.
And okay. And this is without, but we haven't discussed the contract yet, or we haven't got contract terms.
Right, and we would have to discuss that and have a motion for that after this one, because we can't act on another. The only thing we could do is either vote and vote this down, start over with, it's really 6 in one, half a dozen in the other, but we can't entertain another motion without taking care of what's on the table. So are there any other questions or discussion regarding the amendment that would direct administration, Joanne, to give the applicant information to WASB?
I have a hard time with this without a contract. I think that, I don't know.
Keep in mind, we don't have a contract now.
Right. Well, but it was approved by the board, so it's a matter of we're just shooting it down, yeah. Yeah, it could be if it's in the mail.
And I certainly would let Kyle know if it comes in tomorrow or the next day. I mean, hopefully it's in between someplace right now, but I haven't seen it.
The language in the contract exists. Michelle had shared it when the board adopted it, so there was that contract language. It's just a matter of where the signed copy is. Received, read, and approved.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where the signed copy is.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion on the amendment? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor of the amendment directing Joanne to provide WASB with the names and contact information of the applicants, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed?
I'm going to say nay.
Okay, so the amendment passes. So now the amend motion is that we suspend, yes.
Point of order, did Stephanie hear and be able to vote? Usually I can hear her vote. Stephanie, are you still with us?
You can hear me?
No, did you?
I'm here.
I just wanted to make sure you voted.
I did. Thank you. I said aye.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now the amended motion is to suspend the superintendent search and have administration provide WASB with the contact information for the candidates. And then I believe, Amy, you said then resume it specifically in January of 2021.
Correct.
Okay, so that is now the motion that's on the table. Any discussion about that motion? Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. President, could you say it one more time, please?
Yep, I'll say it one more time after Sue is done.
I just wanted to ask for
Thank you.
clarification on your, when you said to restart the search in January, and that's with WASB.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so the motion now is that we suspend the superintendent search and that Joanne would provide WASB with all of the contact information for the applicants that we have so far, and that we would resume the superintendent search with WASB in January of 21. Did you get all that, Stephanie?
Pretty much.
And also to begin the search for an interim superintendent.
Yes. Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Amy. Okay. Any other questions or discussion on that motion?
I'm not trying to rain on everybody's parade, but without a contract for the interim, right? Search. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed?
Nay.
Okay. I only heard like 3 people vote. Okay. So let's do a roll call. And at any time, any board member has the right to ask for a roll call vote on any motion. So all you have to do is shout out roll call. And this way, I just want to make sure that everyone has a vote and that their vote counts.
So the roll call on the original motion as amended. Anderson?
It's a hard choice for me. Am I able to ask a question right now? All right, so my main thing right now is, as John pointed out, we don't have a contract set yet. And so is our next plan to move to saying something about setting up that contract? Because right now we're motioning for us to send WASB information without a contract. We need to have that set up. And that's my biggest holdup right now. I'm making this decision.
So I would be willing to make a motion after this one to initiate a negotiation of an interim contract with WASB.
And what I'm hearing, though, the concern is that we don't have an approved contract, and so then there's a level of discomfort between turning over the applicants to WASB without that approved contract. So then the caveat has to be that we would have to have a contract approved by the board before Friday, and that everyone would have to make themselves available for like a virtual meeting in order to do so. I think at this point,
Can I make a
Yeah.
suggestion? If we all vote, if we voted this motion down and restated it with everything that Amy has put in there, including the intent to negotiate a contract, but does that address your concerns? Like, are we still comfortable approving Amy's motion, including a contract, even though we won't have it established and signed in time, so that we can continue to send over the candidates and keep the ball rolling? Does that address the concerns of the board?
We have a fiduciary responsibility here. And to agree to something without a contract, I think we are breaching that. So that's my concern, and that's why I'm hung up on this. And like I said, I don't know how we can do this, Dan, and you can chime in as well, but if we have a contract, I'm all for this. But without a contract, I think that it's a misstep.
Maybe I can think of a verbiage that that'll help clean this up, is that we can add that the verbiage to say that information will be given to WASB when the board approves the contract.
I would take it a step further, because if we're going to do it right, let's do it all the way right. We shouldn't even be having this meeting right now because they haven't received the approved and signed contract. So if we want to be completely clear, we can cancel the motion, we can create a new motion to establish a contract, and then once the contract is approved and signed and WASB has received the contract, then we will transfer everything over. Because under that premise, we should not be in this meeting right now.
Well, the one difference is that the board had approved the contract, and so that's legally binding.
I just wanted to say, most of these candidates are not expecting an answer on Friday. I mean, if we don't have a meeting and a signed agreement on Friday, if I don't send those applications on Friday, I'm not trying to imply we're going to lose every candidate on Friday. That's one day after it closes. I want to be conscious of the time frame is what I was trying to bring up. I don't want to be literal on every concept. If we have a special meeting on Tuesday to do this, I would just ask that we have a contract before I send them the information, but nobody's going to expect them to be getting in touch with applicants. I mean, we expected Dan to be in contact so that we wouldn't have those. The same day it closes is unrealistic. No HR office would necessarily be calling candidates the day it closes. This was something we had set up so that he could do that very quickly. With this change, I just don't think that it has to be Friday. I can send those as soon as, like Kyle said, as soon as we have that agreement. I would want the board to be able to see that agreement before they sign it and, have that vote. But I will send as soon as, we could do it the same night. I will have them ready, prepared. It will be a matter of pushing the button, and Dan will have them as soon as that motion would be approved. So there's not going to be a delay on our side. As soon as it's ready, those will be sent out.
And if I could just add a couple of things, it was really me pushing the need for a planning meeting. And I looked at my first draft based on, this meeting I was hoping to take place a number of weeks ago, honestly, just because I knew what kind of timeline issues we were facing. But that is what it is. And that's just simply saying that I'm the one that asked for this meeting to take place as soon as possible after the new board was seated. And I was going on the good faith of Jeff Klett, who nicely told me that the contract is signed, it's been put in the mail. I didn't see a problem with that. And so, I just don't want anyone to feel that it was other board members that were kind of insisting on this meeting taking place. I own that because I needed to get moving on your behalf. And so the only other thought I had for your motion, just to cover tonight, would be to add some language that would be pending approval of an superintendent search contract.
Okay. Any other questions or comments regarding the amended motion on the table?
I would like to add that we specify that this is pending an approved contract with WASB.
An improved contract for the interim superintendent search?
Yes.
Okay, so now we have, that's a motion for an amendment to the amended motion. You guys are getting crash. This is, you don't get any deeper into Robert's Rules of Orders than we are right here, people. Yeah, this is great. Okay, so is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have, so the amendment to the amended motion is that we, is pending a approval of a contract for this interim superintendent search with WASB. Any other questions or comments regarding that amendment? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I have to abstain, Kyle. I can't hear everything.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Just try calling her. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the amendment passes then. So now the motion on the table is that we suspend. Maybe I'll wait until Stephanie gets on the phone.
Yeah, I'm gonna put you on speaker. And
So I don't have to say it more than once.
My phone dies, just call Kyle back, okay? Yep, no problem. Hold up. There you go.
Okay, so now the motion on the table is that we will suspend the superintendent search and look for an interim superintendent. Administration will turn over the applicants to WASB pending the approval of a contract with WASB for an interim superintendent. And we will resume our superintendent search with WASB in January of 21. Did you get that, Stephanie?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
I did. Thank you.
Okay, okay, so that's the motion that's on the table. Any further questions or discussion? See none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 And Stephanie said aye. Okay, you heard her. Any opposed? Okay. So the motion carries that we will suspend the superintendent search for now, look for an interim, and resume our superintendent search in January of 21. Okay. Okay, so so then Dan, what would the next step be? Would you send something to myself, like a proposal for the interim superintendent search? If and so board members, like, what's your availability like? There's a little bit less of a crunch for the timeline for an interim superintendent search than there is. I mean, is this something that can wait until we meet again on May 12th? Or do we need to have, or no, would we have to meet sooner in order to turn over the applicants? Is it something that could wait until next Tuesday? Do we have to meet again sometime this week?
I would be in favor of meeting next Tuesday if Joanne thinks it can wait until next Tuesday.
And my intention would be, if everything can be set to do virtually, we won't even come in. We won't. This would be the only item on the agenda. Okay. Okay, so it sounds, okay, so when we have a contract that is ready to be viewed by the board, does Tuesday work, Joanne? Is that a reasonable amount of time to be in touch?
Does Dan think he can get that to us so that we can look at it as well?
Dan would, how soon do you think you can send a proposal or like a draft contract?
I would say by Friday.
By Friday?
If I tomorrow, that would be my intention is to get it to you tomorrow because it's not all that complicated
Okay.
as I'm recalling. And but at the latest Friday.
Okay.
And typically, I mean, just so you know,
Okay.
I mean, not that I would be uncomfortable with a not to exceed, but this is going to be a much lower dollar volume, and what you're going to the payment is going to be based on the WSB's schedule for hourly payment based on various activities, you know. And so let me get that to you so you can see that, but I want to assure you that my thinking is not to go to a not to exceed unless that's what you would prefer, and it's going to be much, much lower than the search, but I'll leave it up to you as to what you want to do with that.
Okay, thank you. Joanne said that if she can have the contract by noon on Friday, that would be enough time to get it to legal for their review. But it sounds like you would have it to us tomorrow, so that would be great. Okay. Anything else? All right. I guess we'll plan on next Tuesday. More details will kind of come after we check with what's going on in administration and how we will have that meeting set up. Future items for discussion. Okay.
I have one.
Oh, yeah, sure, Stephanie.
Could we discuss all of us going to Google Docs to meet? Future meeting?
Google Hangout.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I think that's, especially for one agenda item, I think that's something we're going to try to have work for next Tuesday.
Awesome.
So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other future agenda items for discussion? Okay, seeing none, may I please have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of adjourning any discussion? All in favor of adjourning the meeting, please say aye.
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 All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, all of you. Have a good night.
You too, thank you.